Alright, in this video, we're going to set up this modification demo scene. And this will show you how to use the items module as a modification, where you can have buffs, debuffs, modifications that affect something over time, and how you can set up the different values, either in custom with a custom dictionary, or built in through the stats and skills system that comes with the modules as well. The end result, if we look at the stats over here, pay attention mostly to the might and also this hit points over here. Let's go with a character that has more hit points. So when we cast heroism, might is increased, and as you can see, this heroism modification ends in a certain amount of time. And the values is actually a percentage for heroism. Accuracy, might, and speed are all increased by 10% while it's active. Now it's about to expire, and we'll see those decrease. All right, and we can also cast weakness. Now weakness will have a negative increase for both hit points max and might. And we can see this in action here as well, with the might down and the hit points max is now below the current hit points. And as this expires, might will go back up and the max hit points will also go back up. There we go. And then we have cast poison. Now poison is of type over time. Now this is a custom type. When you create items, you can create your own custom types. And poison is one that happens over time. And I've set up some custom dictionaries here, which we'll go through in just a minute. That means that every 2 seconds, we're going to reduce hit points by 2 points. So when we cast that, you can watch the hit points go down every 2 seconds. Or every 2 minutes. 1 second is a game minute, and so every 2 in-game minutes, that will go down by the value of 2. And it will stop going down when the poison modification expires and is removed from the modification list on the player. And if we look at the demo player here, we have a list of modifications, and we can see that when I add these, these modifications are added, and all their effects are stored here locally to this one player. And on the dictionary, we have the expiration time, which is right here, and when game time goes beyond that, they are removed automatically from the list. The next step is to create the modification item list. Now we're going to treat a list of items as modifications, so I'll create new items and call this modifications. Now if for some reason this doesn't load, like this right here, sometimes all of them will load, sometimes none of them will load, sometimes one won't load. This is a bug we're trying to solve for right now. I'm not sure why it happens, but if you go into any script, just add a line and save it. As Unity recompiles, it's going to work. So it's a really annoying bug. It doesn't happen all the time when you create a new items list, but if it does for you, that's the solution for now. Hopefully we'll have that fixed and solved soon enough. So now we have our list of modifications. Now these are items, but they're not going to be items like swords or guns or inventory or anything like that. Instead, we're going to have a few different types. We're going to have buffs, and then we'll add a new type for debuffs, and we'll have one for overtime. And we can add a new inventory items here. I should change this to just item, I suppose, but we're going to call a buff heroism, and we'll do a debuff called weakness, and then we'll do, and let me change that to a debuff, and then we're going to do a overtime called poison. I'll spell it right there. All right. So now if we expand any of these, you'll notice that if we click on the values here, the RPG data isn't set. So I'm going to set that to my demo RPG data from the stats and skills demo. So we'll populate that there. And now all of these values will have the values, the prefixes, etc. available for you. So what we really want to do here is set the values that happen when something like heroism or weakness is on the player. And to do that, we're going to select these options. Now the base value is the base value points. The per skill point is going to affect the final value based on the skill points that the player has assigned, and then the per level is going to be affected by the per level of the player. And so what we're going to do is just do the base value. So I'm going to say that with heroism, they get a boost in accuracy and might, and we'll say speed as well. And so we're going to change these base values to be maybe 4, or 4, and 4. Or instead of doing just 4, we're going to do base proficiency of 0.1. So that's going to be a 10% increase in their values here, in their accuracy, might, and speed. And then for the weakness, we're going to do a decrease in hit points max, and we're going to do a decrease in might. And for the hit points max, we're going to do a negative 0.1, so that's going to be a 10% decrease. And might, we're going to do negative 0.2, which is going to be a 20% decrease to their might value. And finally, for poison, we're going to do something slightly different. We're going to do hit points, but we don't want it to be built in this system, because if we do it with this system, then it's going to be automatically calculated as part of their equipment. So it would be a one-time thing while they have this modification assigned to them. Then they simply have that much less hit points. So instead, we're going to use the dictionary here, and we're going to go into our master dictionaries here, and we're going to add a couple things. We're going to overtime stat, and we're going to do overtime period, and finally overtime, or we're going to use this for all modifications. We need a time at which the modification will expire, expiration. So we're just going to say expiration. I think I'm spelling that right. And for each of these, we're going to load these up. We don't need a prefix or suffix, so we turn those off. And for stat over time, we're just going to be doing the string. And you know what? I can actually combine these two. So I'm going to remove period and have overtime stat string. And for period, we're going to do int. And I'm going to do this so that every game minute there's going to be a decrease in hit points while the player is poisoned. And so let me remove that. And then the expiration, we're just going to need a float value. Yep, and that's going to be the game time. We're going to use the game time module for this, and this will tell the system that the script we're going to write when to expire modifications that are assigned to a player. All right, and going back to our items, now we can see that these are available for all of our stats and skills, but we don't need to do the overtime stuff for the heroism and the weakness, because those don't have a thing over time. But for that's weird. But for poison, we do. So we're going to say that hit points is going to be our stat, and then overtime stat, this is going to be the period. I'm going to use integer as a period. So we're going to say every 1 minute, 1 in-game minute, basically. You know what? We're going to need one other. We're going to need a float value. And this is going to be, now it's not listed here, we just have to remember it in our heads, but this is going to be when the next minute happens. So it's going to take in the game time, and every time that goes up by, we'll say 2 actually, every 2 minutes in game, then this is going to trigger. And this is a script we're going to write custom for utilizing the items as a modification system for an overtime modification. Oh, I see. This somehow this changed. Okay. So heroism needs to be buffs. All right. There we go. Right, so we got our buffs, debuffs, and overtime. All right. One other thing we need to add on our modifications is actually the time limit. We have the expiration, but I forgot to add the time limit. So we're going to add one more dictionary here, and we'll just add it up here, and we'll call it time limit, and add that. And then on our time limit, we're going to expose, only in the item, we're going to expose a integer value. And there we go. Going back to items now, we can set these to be, for the demo purposes, we'll set it to be 20 minutes on each of these. And on the poison, overtime stat is going to be the period, which is this integer, and the number of minutes basically, and also the next float that saves the next game time when it's going to trigger, and the expiration, but we don't have the actual value. And so I'm going to add that as a dictionary item as well, and just close that and close that. And then over time, we're going to call this value, and we'll just add that. Same deal here. We'll close those and expose the integer. And so we'll set that on the item for poison overtime value. We'll say that every 2 minutes they're going to lose 4 hit points. Now, or we'll do a little less, we'll do 2 hit points. Now, this is something, of course, that you could, customize yourself. If maybe you have a minimum and max, that's going to be anywhere between, 1 and 3 on a float value, and you could do overtime value min, overtime value max, and then in your code, compute the random number or whatnot, or any resistances that the players have and whatnot. But that's up to you and your game. For this demo, we're going to keep it fairly simple. Now, it's important, as with all of the game modules that we create, they're very, very flexible, which means you can use them in many different ways, and how you implement them in your game is entirely up to you. Because of that, I've created a script, the modifications demo control, which gives an example of one way you can implement the items module as a modification system. Now, this script is assigned to the demo modification control object, and you can see that this object has our game time, and when we press play, you can see that the game time module will drive the current time in the game and keep track of that. Now, generally this would be stored on another object in your project, of course, but for this demo we're just gonna put it here because we do need to utilize game time to automatically expire modifications. The other things we need are the UI stats. We need our control. This is the similar game control for the stats and skills demo. This is a copy, of course, of the stats and skills demo scene and modified. And the modifications itself. Now, the modifications itself is the scriptable object we just created, which has all of our modifications on it. And this stores the data, which we will clone into the player objects during runtime. Now let's check out this script. It's commented pretty well, so hopefully you'll find it really easy to utilize. And let's check out the update loop. Now, the first thing is the set max points. Now, this is only going to run once. If setup is true, then it's going to return and it won't run anymore. And all this is, just for the demo, is to make sure that the hit points and the magic points are actually set to the final stat of the maximum hit points and magic points. Because in this demo and in the game I'm working on, hit points and magic points don't use the proficiency and the values like other stats do. They're just the points. If you have 20 hit points, you have 20 hit points. If you have 10, you have 10. Then no other modifications go into that. And so I want to make sure that that is set for the demo. That's the only thing that does. And then these next two will draw the actual stats and modifications into the UI panels. And that's just drawing the text, so nothing fancy there. And then we're going to do a couple things. We're going to check for overtime effects. So like when poison is active, that's going to reduce the player's hit points over time. And we're also going to check for expirations and remove any modifications that expired. The other thing we're going to do, and again, this is probably going to be called elsewhere in your project if you're using game time, or if you have your own time system that you're going to utilize, we need to increase time. And so that's here as well, just for the demo scene. So let's check out what these two methods are doing. Check for overtime effects. This is first going to go through each player and then call the same method with the player attached for each player. Now, each player is going to go through the modification list, and if I just going to press play, add some modifications to the active player, and pause it real quick. All right, so now we have three modifications, and we can see that poison is this third one here. And so first it's going to find for each one, if the type is not overtime, and that's listed here, then it's going to skip it and just continue. And so what we're really looking for is overtime stats like this poison. And then we're going to check the dictionary, the key. We're going to get the value float for overtime stat. And if we look down here, we can see overtime stat. The value float is right here. Now we set that. We set that when we add the modification to the list. And if the overtime stat float is greater than the current game time, then we're just going to continue. It means that it's not going to trigger yet. We're still waiting for its next opportunity to trigger. Now, if we didn't continue there, then we're going to reduce the stat, overtime stat, by overtime value. So in this case, overtime stat is going to be the hit points, and we're going to reduce it by this integer 2. And so minus 2 hit points every time this triggers. And so essentially that's what we're doing here. We're going to get the stat or skill by the name, in this case hit points, and we're going to remove its points, just minus equals the overtime value, which is 2. That's the get value int from overtime value, and that's going to be reduced by 2. And then we're going to update the timer. Since we want this to happen every 2 seconds, we're simply going to add, set the float value for overtime stat, which is right here. We're going to add the int value, which is 2. That's the period that we're going to add. So that would just go up to this, and this would be 211.4. And that way every 2 seconds it will trigger again. The other thing here that we're doing on update is checking for expirations. And again, we're going to go through each player and then check our expiration for the player. We're going to check the expiration float value, and if that's greater than the game time, then we're going to continue. That means the expiration has not been reached yet, so we don't do anything. Otherwise, we're going to remove the modification and we'll just return. So this will only remove 1 per frame, but that should be fast enough for most projects. Unless you really need to do it all at once, then you could write this method in a slightly different way to make sure that they all get removed at the same frame, if that is important to your project. Now, the remove modification method itself is going to take the modification that we're going to remove and the player, and we're just going to go through the modifications on the player, and if the modification that we're looping through is not the one we're affecting, then we're just going to continue. Once we find that, we're going to make a clone of it just so that we get the removed modification, because the next step is to actually remove it from that player list. But then we need to go through each of the stat or skills in the removed modification and force the player to recompute those final stats. So again, in our example with the weakness, that affected the player's might value. And we want to make sure that once that expires, that might value goes back up. And so we're going to run through all the values base in that modification and force the player to recompute that stat. And then at the end, we will return if we found that. That way we don't keep going through the loop, because we only need to find the one. Now, in the demo scene, when I press this cast heroism, cast weakness, or cast poison, what it's doing is calling the method add modification to active player on the demo object, and we're passing in the string of the name. So add modification to demo player with the modification name. We're going to first grab the item itself. Now this is the Infinity PBR modules item. We're going to call that modification and go through all our modifications. Again, that's the scriptable object we saved right here. And we're going to get the item by that name. And then we're going to first try to update the modification. Now what this does, it returns true or false. If it returns true, it means that we were able to update the modification, and then we won't do anything else. We're done. If we can't, if it returns false, then we're going to add a new modification. So let's check out the try update first. And this was what this is going to do. It's going to pass the modification over, and then we're going to look for the existing modification. And so we're going to call this get modification on the active player. Now this again is also a custom function, custom method that will return, if it exists, the modification of that name that's on the player, that's attached to the player. That means it's already been added to their modification list and it's active. It hasn't been removed yet. It's going to return null if there is none. And so back here, if it's null, then we're going to return false, and that means we didn't find an existing one, and so we need to add it, and that's what we do right here. That returns false, and so we'll move on to add new modification. However, if we did find it, then it's going to continue on, and instead of updating the actual object and replacing it or anything like that, all we're going to do is set the expiration to be the new expiration time. And this expiration time is all it's doing is taking an item, and we're going to take the game time, the current time of the game time, and add to that the time limit. In this case, I think I set them all to 20 in-game minutes, and so we're just going to add 20 to the time counter, the existing time counter. And for this one, we're just going to update the game time. So it just means that the time resets if we click that button again. Now, if we're going to add a new modification, we're doing a few different things. So first, we're going to add a clone of the modification to the player's modifications list. That way, we're not actually adding a reference to the scriptable objects modification. We need to clone that. So the active player modifications list is going to add a clone of the modification we're passing into this method. And then we're going to cache that value, new modification, just by getting the last one there. And then we need to compute the expiration time. And so similar to what we did down here, we're just going to set the value float for expiration to this new expiration time, and we're going to compute that down here. Now, we're going to set also the time over stat value to be the current game time. And this is going to be come into play on the update loop when we check to see if an overtime stat like poison or overtime modification like poison needs to be updated at this frame. This won't come into play for any other object, modification object, so we're just going to add it here for all of them, and that will come into play later. And then we need to force the player to recompute final stats. This is using the stat or skill system rather than our custom dictionary like the poison one does. And for each values base in the new modification, and let's just check that out real quick. And like for heroism, values base, we're not using that per skill per level. That's why you don't see it in our script here. If I was going to be using per skill point and per level, then I would have to do another for each, one for each of those here. But since we're only doing the base values, we're going to say for each one in the list of the values base, make the active player compute final stats. Compute final stats, and we're going to get the stat or skill on the active player by that name, by the stat or skill name, so accuracy, might, or speed. And we're going to make sure they compute the whole tree just to make sure we're getting all of the affected other stats in play, just in case this affects some other stat that the player isn't aware of that affects another stat. And that's part of the stat or skill system, how it all comes together with one call like this. And then that will add it to the player's list and force the player to recompute their stats. All right, so now this will run automatically in the background during your game. As long as your game is updating the time, then these effects, these passive effects, will happen automatically, and they will update themselves. And here if I click it again, the time resets for that one. And that's it. Now you've got a modification system. So whenever a character has something cast on them, or they get hit by a poison dart, or whatever it is, all you have to do is call this add modification to the active player, and everything else will just work as you code it in your custom script. Come join us on the Discord if you haven't joined us yet. This is a great place to talk to other people, see what they're doing with the modules and the other assets we have in the Infinity PBR library. Definitely come check it out. Come say hi. We'd love to talk to you. Thanks. Have a great day.